But what is the relationship between gold and money supply? What you would find is that at 1850, the gold relative to the money supply is about 2%.
But the U.S. government would lose that value then in that exchange, right? Because
they wouldn't lose the value.
Because it's still sitting there. Yeah. I guess it was never theirs.
Yeah, they have the gold, and the Fed has a certificate. None of that would change. I'm just saying if you want to play the mark-to-market game, which the Fed doesn't, but if you did, you can't just attack the securities, which is fair game, but you have to give them credit for the gold. But maybe the real bottom line on that, Nick, is that everyone pretends we don't. That gold's not a monetary asset. We're not on the gold standard. Maybe we really are. They just don't want to admit it.
Jim, you've literally just stolen the monthly issue of my UK gold newsletter there. You've stolen my thunder. But quickly, something to mention about this is that right now they're sitting on unrealized losses. But under QT, those losses would become realized, which is when this starts to really matter. So you can pretend all you like, but if you start to sell the bonds, well, you can only sell them for the market price, not for the par price. And so then potentially the losses start to mount. It's also worth noting that in the UK specifically, I don't know how familiar you are with this, the government gave the Bank of England an indemnity on losses under the QE program. So the connection between the Bank of England's losses that we've been speaking about on bonds and the government's budget is much more clear. And there's some politicians trying to investigate that and find out what that could amount to. But there's this hidden angle, basically, is what we're trying to say on QT, that losses might become realized at central banks. What do you think would do the gold? Go ahead. Sorry, Jim.
I was going to say, we do things differently in the United States. Instead of the government guaranteeing the Fed's guaranteeing the government. So.
What do you think it would do to the gold price if they did revalue mark to market their gold holdings? Do you think that would create a lot of attention for gold and people would pile in, or do you think it would just be an accounting change that no one really notices?
I think it would be a very big deal. But it begs the question, if you're going to revalue it, to what level do you revalue it? So everyone said, well, the market's 1850, that's about where it is today. It goes up and down, but so revalue it at 1850. That could be highly deflationary. And the reason is, in effect, you're putting yourself on a gold standard. You don't have to. That's why they won't do it. They don't want to touch it. But if you did, you would be saying, hey, gold's really worth 1850 and we have this much gold, et cetera. But at that point, analysts would sort of turn and say, well, you're back to a kind of gold standard. What's the relationship between gold and money or currency or U.S. dollars and others, the money supply? But what is the relationship between gold and money supply? What you would find is that at 1850, the gold relative to the money supply is about 2%. Whereas historic gold standards were run with somewhere between 20 and 40%. Bank of England in the 19th century managed a successful gold standard between the Congress of Vienna and World War I with about 20% gold. In the U.S. through most of the 20th century, at least the first half, ran a gold standard with about 40% backing. It was actually the law. The law until the late 1960s, I think 1968, was that the Fed money supply, base money, could not be more than 2.5 times the value of gold. Originally at $20 an ounce, $20.67 an ounce, later $35 an ounce. But whatever that number was, times the amount of gold, that had to be 40% of the money supply, and the money supply could not be greater than that. And then they got rid of that in 1968 because of the war in Vietnam. But the point being, 20% has worked, 40% definitely works. The Austrians like to bang the table and insist on 100%, but maybe, but that's historically not been required. You just need enough gold to be able to give gold to people who want it when they want it, and if you're credible in that dimension, most people are content to hold the money. So as a hypothetical, you can say, well, okay, let's say we want a gold standard, and let's say that we want 40% backing of M1. M2 is a bigger number, or at least it can be. Let's just say, so 40% backing of M1, that's a conservative kind of gold standard, not extreme, but reasonable. What would given the amount of gold the United States has, what would the price of gold have to be in order to maintain that ratio? The answer is about $15,000 an ounce. And people say, Jim, you used to say $10,000 an ounce. Well, that's true because it was true at the time. But when you expand the money supply, the number goes up, right? Because the amount of gold is fixed. So yeah, it was 10,000 not that many years ago, and today it's 15,000. Well, if you say gold's worth 1,800, people are going to say, well, give me the gold. I'll take all the gold you got at that price. And then they're going to have to shut the gold window again, and that has its own problems. But in other words, it's not clear how it would work. I mean, there are a lot of ways it could work mechanically. It's not clear what the government would actually do. But my point is, if you try to mark gold to market on the Fed's balance sheet, you're opening Pandora's box. Because you would be getting a lot of people, bankers, analysts, Wall Streeters, investors, to sit up and take notice and say, well, hey, what is going on here? You're back in the gold business. Well, you got the price.